The cameras were rolling. Two legends stood inches apart, voices lowered but tension unmistakable. And Johnny Carson had just 3 seconds to decide the fate of live television. If you enjoy rediscovering these lost moments from television history, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us preserve these stories for future generations. Thank you for being here. It was a Tuesday in November 1977, and the Tonight Show studio in Burbank hummed with its usual pre-show energy, a low-frequency vibration of anticipation that seemed to rattle the very floorboards beneath the stage. Stagehands moved with practiced silence, adjusting microphones that had captured the laughter of presidents and the confessions of movie stars, while the Doc Severinsen Orchestra ran through a soft, jazz-inflected rehearsal of Here's That Rainy Day. The brass section gleaming under the warm, amber glow of the studio lights. The audience, already seated in the tiered rows that curved around the desk like a protective embrace, chattered with the gentle excitement of people who knew they were about to witness something special, though none of them could have predicted just how special or how fragile that moment would become. Johnny Carson sat at his desk, the familiar wood grain worn smooth by years of nervous hands and thoughtful tapping, reviewing his notes with the calm focus that had made him the most trusted man in late-night television. To the millions who invited him into their living rooms each evening, Johnny was more than a host. He was a companion, a confidant, the steady presence at the end of a long day who never asked for too much but always gave just enough. But on this particular night, something felt different. A subtle shift in the atmospheric pressure of the room that only someone with Johnny's decades of experience could detect. He noticed it first in the way Ed McMahon laughed during the pre-show briefing, a little too loudly, a little too forced, as if trying to fill a silence that wasn't there yet. He noticed it in the way the stage manager, a veteran of the show who had seen everything from technical failures to celebrity meltdowns, avoided eye contact when handing Johnny the cue cards. He noticed it in the quiet tension that seemed to hang in the air, heavy and electric, like the stillness before a summer storm breaks over the desert. He didn't know yet what was coming. Not exactly. But Johnny Carson had spent a lifetime reading rooms, reading people, reading the invisible currents that flow between human beings, and his instincts were screaming a single, clear warning: be ready. That evening's guest list read like a Hollywood dream, a lineup that would have made any other host tremble with insecurity. But for Johnny, it was simply another night at the office, or so it seemed. Dean Martin was scheduled to appear, promoting his latest film, and as always, bringing that effortless charm that had made him one of the most beloved entertainers in America. The audience adored Dean. They loved his laugh, his easygoing manner, the way he could make a simple joke feel like a warm embrace, the way he seemed to exist in a perpetual state of relaxed enjoyment that everyone else wished they could achieve. But there was another name on the list, a name that carried weight, history, and a certain kind of gravitational pull that could shift the atmosphere of any room it entered. Frank Sinatra. The two men had been friends for decades, bound together by music, by movies, by a shared understanding of fame that few others could comprehend. They had laughed together in smoky backrooms, performed together on stages around the world, traveled together in convoys of limousines that shut down cities. They were part of that legendary circle known as the Rat Pack, a group that defined cool for an entire generation, setting the standard for style and swagger that men still tried to emulate 50 years later. To see them together on the same stage was a rarity, a gift to anyone who remembered the golden age of entertainment, a glimpse into a world where giants walked among mortals. But friendships, even legendary ones, are complicated things, woven through with threads of jealousy, competition, and old wounds that never quite heal. What the audience didn't know, what the producers didn't know, what even Johnny Carson hadn't been fully briefed on until moments before the show went live, was that the relationship between Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra had reached a breaking point. There had been words exchanged in private, harsh words, the kind that cut deep and leave scars that time struggles to fade. There had been disagreements over business, over loyalty, over the changing tides of an industry that was leaving some behind while propelling others forward. And tonight, on national television, with 50 million people watching, those unresolved tensions were about to collide in a way that no one could have predicted. The green light flashed, the opening music swelled, and Johnny Carson turned to the camera with that familiar, reassuring smile, welcoming the world to The Tonight Show. He introduced Dean Martin first, and the audience erupted, a wave of sound that washed over the stage as Dean walked out, looking every bit the icon he was, wearing a sharp suit and carrying himself with that loose-limbed grace that made everything look easy. He took his seat on the couch, leaning back as if he owned the place, flashing that million-dollar grin that had sold millions of records and filled countless theaters. Johnny engaged him in the usual banter, asking about the new movie, teasing him gently about his reputation for enjoying a good time, and Dean played along perfectly, delivering punchlines with the timing of a master craftsman. But if you looked closely, if you watched the way his eyes darted toward the wings of the stage, you might have noticed a flicker of anxiety, a tightness around the mouth that wasn't part of the act. Then the introduction came, the one that sent the audience into a frenzy of applause and whistles. Frank Sinatra. He walked out with a different energy, more contained, more intense, acknowledging the crowd with a slight nod and a small wave before taking the seat next to Dean. The physical proximity was immediate and striking. Two titans of entertainment sitting side by side, separated by only a few feet of cushion, yet seeming miles apart in spirit. Johnny, sensing the undercurrents, navigated the conversation with the skill of a captain steering a ship through rough waters. He started with safe topics, asking Frank about his recent concerts, his upcoming tours, the enduring appeal of his music. Frank answered politely, his voice rich and resonant, but his body language was rigid, his shoulders tense, his gaze fixed straight ahead rather than looking at the man beside him. Dean, meanwhile, seemed to be trying too hard to be casual, making jokes that fell slightly flat, laughing a second too late at things Frank said. The dynamic was off, skewed, and the audience, usually so attuned to the rhythm of the show, began to sense that something was wrong. It started subtly, a comment from Dean about the music industry, a vague reference to people who forget where they came from. Frank's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression that flashed across his face and vanished, but Johnny saw it. He always saw everything. The conversation drifted toward the topic of loyalty, a dangerous subject for men who had lived their lives in the spotlight, surrounded by sycophants and opportunists. Dean made a joke, ostensibly harmless, about how some people change when they get big, how they stop returning phone calls, how they act like they're better than everyone else. The studio audience laughed, assuming it was just another one of Dean's self-deprecating routines, but Frank didn't laugh. He turned slowly to look at Dean, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Is that so, Dino?" Frank asked, his voice low, barely audible over the fading laughter of the crowd. "Is that how you see it?" Dean froze, his smile faltering for the first time all night. He hadn't expected Frank to engage, to take the bait so directly. "I'm just kidding, Frankie," Dean stammered, trying to recover, to pivot back to the safety of humor. "You know me, just shooting the breeze." But Frank wasn't in the mood for breezes. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Dean's with an intensity that was terrifying to witness. "We've been friends a long time, Dino," Frank said, his voice gaining strength, cutting through the studio air like a knife. "A long time, and I've stood by you through everything. Through the dry spells, the bad movies, the personal troubles. I've been there. And now, suddenly, I'm the one who's changed. I'm the one who doesn't return calls." The audience had gone silent. The laughter had died instantly, replaced by a collective holding of breath. This wasn't part of the script. This wasn't the playful banter of the Rat Pack. This was real, raw emotion spilling out onto live television. Dean shifted uncomfortably in his seat, looking for an escape route, but there was nowhere to go. "Frank, come on," Dean pleaded, his voice tinged with desperation. "Not here. Not on TV." "Why not here?" Frank countered, his voice rising slightly. "Why not let everyone know the truth? You've been avoiding me for months, Dino. Months. And for what? Because I asked you to honor a commitment? Because I expected you to act like a professional?" The tension was palpable, a physical force pressing against the walls of the studio. The band members in the background had stopped tuning their instruments, their eyes wide with shock. Ed McMahon, seated to Johnny's right, looked frozen, unsure of whether to intervene or stay out of it. All eyes turned to Johnny Carson. He sat behind his desk, his hands clasped loosely in front of him, his expression unreadable. He was watching the two men, analyzing the situation with the precision of a surgeon. He knew that this moment could go in any number of directions. It could escalate into a full-blown argument, a spectacle that would dominate headlines for weeks and potentially destroy decades of friendship. It could awkwardly fizzle out, leaving a sour taste in everyone's mouth and ruining the rest of the show. Or, if handled correctly, it could become something else entirely, a moment of genuine human connection that transcended the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. The clock was ticking. Every second of silence stretched out like an hour. Dean looked defeated, his head bowed, while Frank sat rigid, his chest heaving slightly with the effort of holding back his emotions. The audience waited, terrified and mesmerized, witnessing a crack in the facade of two of the most invincible figures in entertainment. And then Johnny moved. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, nothing flashy or attention-grabbing. He simply leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, and spoke. His voice was calm, steady, devoid of judgment or panic. "Gentlemen," he said, the word carrying a weight that immediately commanded attention. "I think we need to take a breath." The simplicity of the statement was disarming. It wasn't a command, not really, but it functioned as one. Frank blinked, seemingly surprised by the intervention, and Dean looked up, gratitude washing over his features. "We're all friends here," Johnny continued, his tone gentle but firm. "And I think we all know that sometimes when people care about each other deeply, things get complicated. Emotions run high, misunderstandings happen." He paused, letting the words sink in, giving the two men a moment to regroup. "But we're also on television," Johnny added, a hint of his trademark wit returning to his voice. "And while I'm sure our audience appreciates honesty, I don't think they tuned in tonight to watch a breakup. They tuned in to see two legends who have given us so much joy over the years." The audience murmured in agreement, the tension easing slightly. Johnny had reframed the situation, turning a potential disaster into a testament to the depth of their bond. He had acknowledged the conflict without exploiting it, validated their feelings without letting them spiral out of control. Frank looked at Johnny, really looked at him, and something in his posture softened. The anger drained away, replaced by a weary resignation. "You're right, Johnny," Frank said quietly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. He trailed off, unable to find the words. Dean reached out, placing a hand on Frank's arm. "No, Frankie," Dean said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm the one who's sorry. I've been stupid. I've been avoiding you because I was embarrassed, not because I didn't care. You're my brother, Frankie. You know that." Frank looked at Dean, and for the first time since he had walked onto the stage, a genuine smile touched his lips. "I know, Dino," he said. "I know." The relief in the room was instantaneous. The audience exhaled collectively, a sound like a rushing wind, and then broke into applause, not the polite clapping of a game show, but a roaring, heartfelt ovation for the resolution of a very human drama. Johnny sat back, allowing the moment to breathe, letting the reconciliation play out naturally without interfering further. He had done his job. He had steered the ship through the storm, keeping it on course without capsizing. But what happened next, in the moments that followed, was something that few people ever saw, a sequence of events that remained hidden from the public eye for decades. As the commercial break approached, Johnny signaled for the band to play them out, and the music swelled, covering the sounds of the audience's applause. But instead of cutting to black immediately, the cameras stayed on for a few extra seconds, capturing a fleeting image that would become legendary among the crew. Frank and Dean were still holding on to each other's arms, talking rapidly, their heads close together, the animosity completely gone, replaced by an urgent need to reconnect. And Johnny, standing up from his desk, walked over to them. He didn't say anything grand. He didn't make a speech. He simply placed a hand on each of their shoulders, squeezed gently, and nodded. It was a gesture of profound solidarity, a silent acknowledgement of the fragility of human relationships and the importance of preserving them. In that brief touch, Johnny conveyed more empathy and understanding than 1,000 words could have expressed. He was telling them that he understood the pressure they were under, the scrutiny they faced, the difficulty of maintaining friendships in the glare of the spotlight. And he was telling them that they weren't alone. When the show returned from the break, the atmosphere had transformed completely. The tension was gone, replaced by a warmth and camaraderie that felt authentic and earned. Dean and Frank joked with each other again, but this time, the jokes landed, the laughter was real, and the chemistry between them was electric. They told stories from the old days, tales of Las Vegas in the 50s, of road trips and pranks and late-night jam sessions. The audience ate it up, reveling in the nostalgia, in the sight of these two icons, remembering their shared history with such affection. Johnny facilitated the conversation with his usual grace, asking the right questions, knowing when to step back and let the magic happen. But throughout the rest of the interview, there was a subtle shift in Johnny's demeanor. He seemed more attentive, more present, as if the earlier confrontation had awakened something in him. He watched Frank and Dean with a keen interest, studying the way they interacted, the way they communicated without words. It was as if he was seeing them anew, not just as celebrities, but as men navigating the complexities of life and friendship. And perhaps, in watching them, he was reflecting on his own relationships, his own struggles with maintaining connections in a world that demanded so much of him. The show ended with a musical performance, a duet by Frank and Dean that brought the house down. They sang My Kind of Town, their voices blending perfectly, the harmony symbolizing the restoration of their bond. The audience gave them a standing ovation, cheering and whistling, unwilling to let the moment end. As the credits rolled, Johnny thanked his guests, his voice filled with genuine appreciation. "Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Dean," he said. "It's been an unforgettable night." And it was. But the story doesn't end there. What happened backstage after the cameras stopped rolling is where the true heart of this tale lies. As the audience filed out, buzzing with excitement about what they had just witnessed, the three men retreated to Johnny's dressing room. The door closed, shutting out the noise of the studio, creating a private sanctuary where masks could be dropped and pretenses abandoned. According to accounts from crew members who were nearby, the conversation that took place in that room was intense and emotional. Frank and Dean poured their hearts out to each other, airing grievances, apologizing for past hurts, reaffirming their commitment to their friendship. They cried, they laughed, they hugged like long-lost brothers. And Johnny sat with them, listening, offering wisdom and comfort when needed, but mostly just being there. He didn't try to fix everything. He didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. He simply provided a space for them to be vulnerable, to be human. In a world where everyone wanted something from them, where every interaction was transactional, Johnny offered them the gift of his presence, his unconditional support. It was a testament to the kind of man he was, the kind of host he had become. He wasn't just an entertainer. He was a guardian of these moments, a protector of the humanity behind the fame. Years later, Dean Martin would speak briefly about that night in a rare interview. He didn't go into details, didn't reveal the specifics of their argument or the content of their backstage conversation, but he did say one thing that has stuck with historians and fans alike. "That night on Johnny's show," Dean said, his voice soft with memory, "saved me. I don't know where I'd be without Frankie, and I don't know where I'd be without Johnny. He knew exactly what to do. He didn't save the show, he saved us." That statement, simple yet profound, captures the essence of what happened on November 15, 1977. It wasn't just a television moment, it was a life moment. It was a reminder that even the biggest stars, the most iconic figures, are just people, struggling with the same issues of pride, fear, and loneliness that affect us all. And sometimes all it takes is one person, one steady hand, to guide them back to the light. Johnny Carson never sought credit for what happened that night. He never mentioned it in his monologues, never wrote about it in his memoirs. To him, it was just part of the job, just another night of hosting the show. But for those who were there, for those who witnessed the raw emotion and the ultimate reconciliation, it was something more. It was a masterclass in empathy, a demonstration of the power of kindness and understanding. It showed that even in the highest stakes environment, with millions of eyes watching, it is possible to prioritize human connection over ratings, to choose compassion over conflict. The legacy of that night extends far beyond the archives of NBC. It serves as an inspiration for anyone who has ever found themselves in the midst of a conflict, anyone who has ever struggled to bridge the gap between themselves and someone they love. It reminds us that communication is key, that forgiveness is possible, and that sometimes all we need is someone to hold the space for us while we figure it out. Johnny Carson held that space for Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, and in doing so, he created a moment that will resonate forever. As we look back on the golden age of television, on the era of Johnny Carson and The Tonight Show, we often focus on the jokes, the celebrities, the cultural impact. But moments like this, the quiet, unscripted acts of humanity, are what truly define that era. They remind us why we loved Johnny so much, why we trusted him, why we felt like he was a friend. He wasn't just entertaining us, he was showing us how to be better human beings. He was teaching us, through his actions, the value of patience, the importance of listening, the power of a gentle touch. And in a world that often feels chaotic and divided, those lessons are more relevant than ever. So the next time you find yourself in a disagreement, in a moment of tension with someone you care about, remember the night Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin faced off on The Tonight Show. Remember how quickly things can escalate, but also how quickly they can be resolved with a little bit of grace and a lot of heart. Remember Johnny Carson, sitting calmly behind his desk, ready to steer the ship through the storm. And remember that no matter how dark things seem, there is always a path forward, always a way to reconnect, always a chance to heal. The story of that night is a testament to the enduring power of friendship, the resilience of the human spirit, and the profound impact one person can have on the lives of others. It is a story that deserves to be told, to be remembered, to be cherished. Because in the end, it's not about the fame or the fortune or the accolades. It's about the connections we make, the bridges we build, the love we share. And on that Tuesday night in November 1977, three men showed us exactly what that looks like. If you remember watching Johnny Carson during those years, or if this story has touched you in some way, we would love to hear from you. Tell us where you used to watch the show, who your favorite guest was, or share a memory of a moment that stuck with you. Your stories keep this history alive, and we'd love to read them in the comments below. Thank you for joining us on this journey through television history, and for helping us keep the spirit of Johnny Carson alive.